welcome back to Man in the Middle, episode 2. Right, so today we're going to talk about agentic AI and what are the repercussions of it. Right, where do you want to start?
I mean, there are too many descriptions and perceptions about agentic. Maybe it would be good to discuss first what we understand about agentic, to put a common ground. I think then we can build on top of it, right? And with that, I can begin. For me, agentic is basically if you give the agent some autonomy and some tools and some descriptions, what you are expecting. That's the agentic approach. If you are defining the limits and actually you are putting a very well-defined flow, how things should work without giving the LLM to make many decisions or some autonomy, then I would say that would become more like a workflow. Where you have more well-defined outputs, maybe. So this is how I see things.
Yeah, I think the main thing is to differentiate between Gen AI applications, where you're generally talking about something that's quite a prescriptive process. So I will send a prompt, I will then get a response to something. There's no reasoning or consideration around it. It's a very prescriptive process, whereas the agentic side of things is to give more autonomy using LLMs around the process, but you're allowing some decision making, some reasoning to take place, access to tools to achieve a goal. So it's more goal oriented. You can set a higher level task that needs to be achieved rather than just saying, I'll ask a question, can I have a response? So it's that broader process. And as you said, Bersh, I think there's the differentiation between the workflow side of things, which is go and do this, followed by this, followed by this, followed by this, using the capability of LLMs, but also programmatic code-based tooling. And then the true autonomous agentic side to it is you set a goal and you basically say, work out how to achieve this for me. You've got access to these tools to do it. Go off, plan out how you're going to do that and come back to me with the answer for it.
So if I was to summarize it, one of the key differentials is the autonomy. It is designed to work on its own without much user or human input to achieve a single goal. So that's his second characteristic. You give it a goal and it works out itself what it wants to do. And lastly, that works out itself is that problem solving, which in my opinion, they're great. Until you look at how it does it, and that's where the security part of it comes into place. I think, Matt, you mentioned a few weeks back, like the problems that you could achieve, like give it autonomy and a goal orientated, let's say connected, like you said, to a house warming system, I don't know, your boiler, and it sets it on fire. Because it technically has achieved its goal and it has the autonomy to do whatever it wants to achieve the particular goal. So I guess number one question for me is like, how on earth do you set guardrails in an agentic system, the autonomy in it, without being prescriptive? Warm out the house, but please don't blow it up.
Yeah, and I think here what you also need to do is you need to take that step back as well, and you need to think actually prior to coming and using agentic, it's understanding what it is. And I think this is a really key thing, both for security focused people on a project, but also non-security focused, is to say, yes, this thing is potentially amazing in terms of what it can do. It can change the way a workforce operates, moving from some of the bottlenecks that a human-centric workforce will have to actually all of a sudden the data analysis, seeing patterns and things that a human just can't work at that speed, and having that autonomy and kind of bringing in the extra productivity to a workforce, is to understand alongside that the implications of introducing new team members effectively with autonomy and then thinking about all of the considerations to actually then plan out what you need to think about when it comes to actually introducing it. It's a bit of a weird one to have to try and think of, because sometimes I will say to people, don't humanize it, but at the same time there is an element of humanizing it, because sorry, something just flashed up on the screen. There we go. Because it's like bringing another human into your workforce that is really fast, really high powered, and so on, but all of the culture and ethics and everything like that apply to 99.9% of humans that you would bring in don't necessarily apply to this new team member. So you've got lots of power, lots of capability, but potentially a complete loose cannon as to what they might do. And you've got to plan that into how your system and how your new team is going to operate. So there's all those considerations around it that I think are the really interesting part of this.
They are, and I think you mentioned something really, really interesting about the ethics. How do you achieve accountability? And how, I think one of the things organizations need to worry about is the legality of using these systems when it makes decisions that affect human lives. There is cases where AI system be used to make life or death decision or healthcare decisions, or perhaps, we said power plants and all those kind of stuff. Who ends up being responsible and ultimately accountable for making sure that these things don't happen, or the adverse outcomes don't happen?
I don't think we are this far away to ask this question, because to respond to this question, even ask this question, I think we need a lot of maturity on these things. We cannot respond to this question.
Yeah.
Because we need to understand things better. The key point here that Matt stated here is humanizing things. So actually, if you look at history, whenever there is something new, humans, this is what we do. We humanize things. We try to conceptualize like ourselves, and then we make a lot of mistakes. I mean, we did that with, when we begin understanding the world and the nature better, we suddenly created gods in our images, these kind of things. Actually, we are doing the same thing. I'm not saying that we are creating gods, but we are again humanizing it. So when you bring that question, which is put on top of ethics, which has been building maybe thousands of years of human culture, that's a very different area, which agents are not there. So it's like when we ask this question, then we ask another human-centric question, like who is responsible? Because they are not in a place to be asked that question. Think about it's a neuron, and the only reason or the willing of that neuron is to achieving something. That's it. There is nothing else. We cannot put ethics. We cannot put responsibility. We cannot put anything human related in those models. This is not possible.
Absolutely. That's what I was trying to go with. Let's pick something that's actually quite close to my heart, and we all three of us worked on autonomous vehicles, for example. So agentic AI in action. I think one of the best use cases for me is autonomous vehicles. But what happens, I'm not quoting iRobot here, when he makes the decision, the robot, of which one to save, but let's say in case of an accident makes one decision over the other. It decides not to crash in front of a truck because they will kill all the occupants, but goes and runs over a child, God forbid. So how is this?
But you don't have an answer for that question even without AI. I mean, if you ask that, instead of AI, put human there, you don't have an answer to that question. That's unsolvable.
No, they don't. But the human is in charge. So the human has got the ethics. Now is you have a machine that's made decisions. Who then is accountable for those decisions? I know it probably was very crude examples, but there'll be a lot less crude examples of it. All I'm trying to say is, do we then want to say to people, before you start employing agentic AI in your organizations, the recommendation is to start thinking of the ethics and who's going to be accountable for the decision that it makes. I mean, there's a famous IBM quote from the 70s that any decision that affects humans should be made by a human. It's more philosophical than technical, but
well, I think so the examples you give, I think some of those are a bit more at the extreme end from where we are now, because I think we're still early days. I think organizations are still, they're not particularly far down the journey. So things like controlling critical national infrastructure and making decisions that will potentially cause lights to go off or stay on, whatever it might be, I think we're too far away from that at the moment. At some point, somebody will potentially ask the question, because that's what we do as humans. We're going to keep on pushing. Likewise with the car question, I think that it will be a political and a legal thing that will need to be introduced to say, if you wish to sell your cars with autonomy, this is going to be the rule on it, whatever it might be. Again, I think that's a far bigger and broader concept beyond it. I think what's important for this session that we're having now is to bring it back more to what are the initial sorts of use cases that we're going to see, to bring it back to something a bit more relatable and a bit more closer to us. And so whether that is, you've got personal shopping type assistants, you've got healthcare assistants that might be helping with diagnosis of something or suggestion of something, or recommendations for medication and things like that, or you've just got elements of automation within system process and stuff. There's nothing to do with, do we need more power? Are we not going to apply power? It's just, this is an activity that takes place now that we could look to automate and allow there. And I think there are the considerations around that, and that, to go back to what you just said, Nick, now is the time that organizations need to be looking at formulating an agentic AI strategy that includes the ethical side, that includes the security side of it. That I think the sort of work that needs to be taking place now by our organizations is to assess, where are we in terms of our security maturity? And that's not an agentic thing. That's if we wish to introduce something with autonomy, and we actually want it to be autonomous, and we want to allow it to make decisions, should we introduce it to a system where we don't actually believe we've got a good bedrock and maturity of security around our estate? And the answer should be, we need to get our maturity up before we look at introducing these. I think that, for me, is the initial importance that organizations need to make sure they're aware of.
I think that's a really, really good point, because on the security side, and you mentioned all the guardrails and all the security strategy, and not every organization is fully mature. It can never be. But what I find out, I think, is most organizations, if they're going to employ agentic AI, they'll need to also update their enterprise risk management framework. And I say this, if I give an example, let's say, take the example of a DBA. Will a DBA go and delete the database willfully, right? And you give that as part of their job, you give them full admin access. They can do so because it's their job. The risk of doing that, while the impact is quite large, the likelihood might be low, might be medium, depending on the type of enterprise, because humans instinctively want to keep their job. They want to be respected in their community, all the kind of good stuff. And we have other controls, like, we do checks, background checks, and all the credit checks, all that kind of stuff. So as a risk, you say, well, the low to medium likelihood, high impact if this is your ledger, your banking ledger. With agentic AI, the likelihood could potentially be medium to high, or even elevated, because they have no restriction on that morality. Because why would they? You give them a goal. The goal is do this job efficiently. Let's say you got malware in the database, remove it. RM minus RF, everything gone.
Yeah.
And as another very simple example, but I think not just new controls need to be introduced and new guardrails need to be mature, but also the risk management framework needs to change to take into account the lack of human thinking and desire preservation of itself.
Yeah.
I'll go a little bit, even maybe back, and I would say organizations need actually a agentifying process.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, for instance, if I'm going to agentify a process, then the first thing that I would do is actually try to create first a workflow. Because giving the autonomy in the beginning I don't think it's a good idea. Like, if I look at also from the development point of view with our experiences and such, because there are too many variables, and you don't know if when things go wrong, what went wrong. So you need actually to define what you are doing very well, maybe with some kind of process mining and such. Look at the process that you want to agentify, define it properly, and then try to make a workflow around it. And when it works, then slowly bring the autonomy in the tool or in the solution to make it better. And this way, because when it's workflow, it's easy to secure it, right? Because it's very well defined, you know what it's going to use, what it's going to do step by step. So I think the organizations first need like a comprehensive agentifying approach. How do they find the opportunities to bring it agents and hybrid workforce to their environment? And security and risk strategy should be attached and bind directly to it, because the risk, as you say, Nick, is different.
Mm-hmm.
And then the assessment of the risk should be done and driven there on the process level, because then you can manage it. If you know the details of the process and if you know where it is touching, it's like a threat modeling, right? You do a threat modeling on the processes, and then you can put controls around it as long as it's a flow.
Well, that was going to be one of the things I was just going to bring up, and I think it's, for me, it's just this at this stage, it's an awareness of the potential for risk here, and so I think it's part of that strategy is to have that appreciation and doing threat models around the processes that you're considering, to actually call out the implications. And that comes back to, again, have you got the good foundation, the good maturity within your environment? Then you've got the consideration around the tools that these agents are going to use. How have they been written? How are you testing them? Again, if you've got good application development security processes in place and you are happy that what you are building is secure, then that's a great start. It's then looking at it with the agentic lens as well of this, could this be used for something you hadn't intended it on? And then it's also modeling around the agent itself and understanding, actually, when we allow it to make decisions, how is it going to do that, and what's the likelihood of something coming up, and what sort of decisions will it make? And I think that then feeds into a period of additional security testing that you won't necessarily have done before. And does it count as just security testing, or is it potentially also elements of functional and performance testing to say, if I set a task like this, what does the agent go and do? And actually, how many times out of 10 does it go and do the right sort of thing that we expect? Because when you're giving it that autonomy, it could go and do anything, within reason, but it could choose any means of achieving it that you haven't foreseen. At what point do you say, yes, we're happy that this goes to production? I think there's going to be this new area of testing, and there's got to be a time period consideration. And the struggle there is always going to be, I want to get this out into production. So how are you going to balance the way that agent's going to work autonomously with getting some innovation, some business results out into your environment, and saying, I'm happy that this can do the job?
Something has to monitor the agent, right? You need to have the oversight.
Yeah. I think, yeah.
And that the enterprise risk framework has to change, and the controls have to be adapted and elevated to account for the agent not being human. Because we say that we don't have these controls with humans. You don't, because, like I mentioned earlier on, they've got morals, they've got community standing. Unless you're a total sociopath, you wouldn't do some stuff, or compromised. So you need to have that in place. But secondly, what I was saying is, remember that people have not got into grips with how generative AI works yet.
Yeah.
And we move into securing generative AI, which is based on some of the stuff that comes out of the LLMs, plus the connection to the tools and a few other bits. So to me is have the controls picked up, have people got the maturity. You mentioned the application life cycle and the testing that you do and the controls that you do, but quite a few times those are skipped because of business priorities and because the risk allows you to do so. The likelihood impact is much smaller, and that's a good thing. With what I'm hearing everybody say that, well, actually the risk changes now, and what could have been a should or perhaps a could in a test or in a potential misuse, now it could be it should be a must. But
well, I think
sorry.
as well though on this. So thinking back to the discussion we've had previously, there's the new threat origin, and it's that AI self-induced, isn't it? That we haven't had to think about before. It was always it's a human attacker, whether malicious or through bad practice or mistake, and you've now got an extension of that is not human but potentially makes mistakes or potentially does work in a way that we hadn't foreseen, and therefore is AI induced, and we have to think about threat modeling that as well. So there's the addition and changes to these processes, changes to what we're thinking about from the risk and the likelihood and all those sorts of things. And I think it's like I say, it's being aware of that. It's thinking about the technology that's going to be needed to support this and to secure it, and taking the time to work out at what rate do you want to innovate and try these things, but also protect your system. And I do wonder how organizations will balance this and trying to make sure that they're not left behind compared to competitors, and whether there is going to be an influx of breaches related to agentic AI being released into the environment before the environment's ready for it. I think it'll be interesting to see what we start to see coming up in conversation in with organizations, or what becomes public knowledge on this area, because I think the potential for things to not quite go as planned is increasing beyond what we've seen prior to the kind of autonomous element coming in.
So if we're to advise somebody, say, hey guys, I want to use agentic AI to manage, I don't know, human resources or other stuff in an organization. Let's say mop up all my Jira backlog and fix all the open backlog items there.
That's happening, by the way.
Well, that's why I picked it up, right? Because it's already happening. So what would be the controls that you would want to recommend an organization to have in place so things don't go a bit off the rails?
Well, I would say you've got to have controls around how tools can be used. So yes, you want to give access to them, but you've got to make sure they can only be used for the intended use case. I think you've got to have the controls around the auditability of what is going on, because you need the full record, just as you would anyway. So not necessarily a new thing, but that needs to be extended here. And then importantly, I think it's the authorization model around the agents. What should be doing what? How do you ensure that it's only got permission to do the things that you expect it to do? And then it's also the control around protecting that AI alignment piece. So putting controls in place to ensure that the general concept that you're requesting it to do via its task, it then actually chooses actions that align closely with how we would do it ourselves, and getting to the outcome that we want through that same process to avoid negative steps on it. So I think there's controls there to make sure that happens.
I wonder if another control, and I haven't thought this through yet, but extending the test framework, because I'm guessing the tests might need to be a little bit more extensive than the traditional functional and non-functional testing that you do with traditional systems. And I wonder if somebody's come up with a testing framework to prevent those misuse cases, or rather those out-of-the-box thinking that these systems can produce, that would lead to negative outcomes.
Yeah.
There should be definitely like change in how we do the testing. Because of the nature of the models and generative AI, it's
But
it's not deterministic.
I think an important control alongside that, Birch, is the decision around what model to use, and that needs to be assessed as well, because you've got to remember, at the end of the day, the model is going to make decisions based on that pattern matching. So if it has a data set that tells it how to be able to hack through a system, how to be able to do these things, and it's also been trained and driven to actually look for that sort of activity, it's going to be more likely to select that as the logical path. If you've got something that doesn't have any of that data within its training set, it's not going to go and learn how to go and do that thing. So model selection, I think, is a really important piece going forward, and trust around the models.
I understand what you mean, and I would like to just think about like if it is possible, because the models that you are going to use for agentic will be large. So like actually, and you need that kind of information actually, and these will be foundational models, not really very specific. They need to have a capability to put structured output so that they can run tools and such. And these are currently only very large language models. Really large language models can do that, right?
But you still would validate though, wouldn't you? So we want to look at using Model X. Therefore, we will do some sort of testing to understand in this scenario what might it select to do. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. I don't think anyone should just go and pick a model and say, oh, it's a model and it's popular, we're going to use it. There should be an understanding and a validation of we've done something to say we are happy that this is the model versus that model.
Yeah, like for the provenance, right?
Yeah. Can I deduce something from both what you guys said? So provenance, it sounds like a supply chain issue to me, which organizations really should take into account for everything they do, not just for AI and agentic AI. But second, I wonder, I flip-flop between loads of regulation makes life safer and very little regulation makes innovation happen. But I wonder if there is a play here that, like we have rules and regulations around the software bills of materials, whether an AI bill of material would ever be a possibility.
That's essential.
And a requirement.
That's
and
essential.
I'm not saying, yeah, absolutely, but not just this is Model X or Model Y, but also Model X. Where did you get the data from?
Yeah, it's a must. It's a must.
Absolutely, and that's what I mean is that organizations can't willingly choose a model just because it, like you said, Matt, is popular, or X, Y, and Z company said, well, this is great, it's the best thing since sliced bread. It's like, what's in it?
Well, but do you know what organizations are going to base some of their selection criteria on for a model?
From X, Y, and Z company.
It's cost.
Yeah, that is true.
You think about the cost of inference, the cost of these agents running. If you can use something, and we've seen this, okay, we've seen a very popular model come out that actually there was a lot of question around should it be used, so DeepSeek, but the cost was one of the major factors that you see people reporting on. Wow, I can now use something that is, I can't remember the exact figures, but a tenth of the price, whatever it might have been. So as an organization where you've already got cost considerations, if you start using a model and then you find another one that's a tenth of the cost and you've built up an agentic workforce, your operating cost can massively shrink by selecting a new model. So there's always going to be that balance between cost and security and performance and everything that has all got to be considered, and you're going to have many different voices, some which are going to be more vocal or more listened to than others, driving those decisions.
Well, that's why I mentioned the stick of the regulation, that it's not so much about, so the cost, I get it, everybody lives in the real world, but it's about, do you know what's in it? And if this is cheap, but you could have anything in it that could lead your whole application to do things that are massively business negative outcomes, then you should think twice and then be accountable for it. I mean, we see enough accountability as it is.
It's not necessarily just the thinking twice. It's having that testing and security framework in place to methodically evaluate that. Exactly. That's what needs to be in place, so that it's not a case of, well, in my opinion, it's look, you're the budget holder. I know you want to reduce the cost, but let me demonstrate via this trusted framework that we've implemented why actually selecting this model or moving to that model for a cost reason will potentially have a negative impact on security. And then you can demonstrate and make that. And that's why it's a case of, yes, people are going to charge towards Agentic because of what it's offering from an innovation perspective, but this is where the real recommendation is get that strategy, get that framework, start to put together these building blocks from a security perspective that are going to facilitate you doing that safely and securely.
It is very essential, because if you look at the model side, although a lot of them say that they are open, it's only open weights.
Yeah.
So actually we don't have any trustworthy resource, I think, except for just one model which has been published this week. We have no idea about the used training data.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. The second part, so based on that, so if you go from the training data, okay, let's say you fix that, or you are confident with that. The next bit, based on the training, depending on a larger model, is, and I don't think we've fixed the hallucination problems yet. Then you need guards or some weight guards or some guards from the LLM, whatever the agent is getting from the model, that the answer is actually legitimate, not something that the agent takes as gospel, but is completely wrong and then acts on it. It's one thing being told, here's a piece of code, and you think, who on earth wrote this? And you capture it, so this is not right, 2 + 2 is never 5. But the agent trusts his own, as part of the construct, trusts his own LLM and makes a decision based on it. So it's like, do you need then those?
There are some techniques and tactics to tackle that. You are right. So one of the things most of the frameworks are doing is like reflection. So like, the model responds to you, then you actually, without executing that, you show that, like send that back to the model again to like reflection and assessment. And as the second or the other iteration is not generation, because the first is generation. It's like, a statistical approach. The second one, you gave full the context, what it generated, then it's much more easier for the model reflect and find problems that it did in the beginning, because in the beginning it generates, it doesn't have the full context, it only knows the past, it doesn't know the future. But when you give the full picture, then models, most of the time, if they are competent and good, then they fix their mistakes. And a lot of the frameworks already use that approach, reflection approach. So it's already built in. And if you are developing something, I would say definitely for critical things, just use that reflection again. That would sort out that problem. Maybe, well, I don't know.
I think the other thing to remember here as well is the path to Agentic AI needs to be an incremental thing.
Yeah.
So organizations need to say, right, we are going to try out on a not particularly sensitive process, not a high risk process, using Agentic AI here. Then you need to say, well, actually, what we might also do is, although we want to achieve autonomy, is we will allow it to define what it's going to achieve, but that step is going to get sent out to a human in the loop initially. Human in the loop is going to say, would I do this? Is this the right thing to be done? Is there a risk with it? And we'll just tick a box that says carry on. Then you start to build up an understanding of how it functions, a confidence in how it functions. Then you say, right, now we're going to leave this part of it to be autonomous, but actually the very final part of that task, I'll jump in still as human in the loop to evaluate that the 3 or 4 steps prior are all still on track and so on. So it doesn't have to be a big bang. And I think, again, the bit that I really want to stress when talking about this with anyone is it's have a plan, have a strategy, think about security, and put the steps in place that aren't going to completely stifle things, but they're at least going to be the eye opener to an organization to say, this has the power to be fantastic, but also the power to go horrendously wrong. Yeah, test it, try it, play with it, understand that actually this is something that you're confident with, and be able to prove it, and then say, yep, let's start looking at how we use it broader.
And I guess that sandboxing method allows you to build those internal organizational standards and controls and guardrails should you want to move to higher risk applications of these systems.
But really importantly here is that the security knowledge and the security focus has got to massively keep up. You can't have somebody trying to apply old or outdated concepts to something that needs a new understanding and a new appreciation of the risk that's associated with it. You've got to keep up. You need people on either advisors or people within your team that can give confidence as to what's going on because they understand the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't call it outdated. I would say fundamental, and then this is additional because you still need those.
Yes, approaches. Yeah, outdated was the wrong word.
Yeah, but it's the space is different, right? These controls are for conventional part of the solution.
Yeah.
The generative AI, LLM, or AI ML, whatever is there, that needs a different approach.
Yeah.
The part of the solution, yes, that's conventional, but you cannot carry conventional to there.
Yeah, and I think this is really important. The genie can't be put back in the box. Generative AI is here. Agentic AI is here.
And it's working.
It's working. Now, organization needs to understand how does it work? What are its threats? What are its basic guardrails around it? And the workforce needs to be trained to keep up with it. It's you can't get away and pretending it doesn't exist.
Yeah, completely agree.
And on that note, we can close for today. Thank you, guys.
Yes.
See you on the next one.
Yep. And he left.
He didn't stop the recording. Right, we better leave, or the recording will carry on.
I'll stop the recording.
How can you do that?